Hey everyone, this is Dr. Casey Johnson. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to the Unlock Wellness podcast. I know you're going to love today's episode with Drew Nutter. Drew is doing some amazing work and is helping so many people, so I'm excited to have him on to share a story with you guys. If you've been loving the Unlock Wellness podcast, be sure to jump onto iTunes, subscribe, and write a review. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate all of the feedback and support. Also, be sure to follow me on social media to keep up with the latest podcast episodes. The best way to connect with me is on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. My username across the board is at Dr. Casey Johnson. That's DrKaseyJohnson. You can also check out my website at drkaseyjohnson.com. It has all of the past podcast episodes and more information about each guest under the Listen tab. While you're on my site, also be sure to check out the Shop tab, where you can check out my first book of my Healthy Children's Book series and learn about the Unlock Wellness Project, which supplies a wellness bag to a child in need for each book purchased. Thank you again for listening. I hope you loved today's episode with Drew Nutter. Welcome to the Unlock Wellness podcast. This is Dr. Casey, and excited for today's guest. I'm here with my friend Drew Nutter, and Drew is someone that I've known for a while. We went to college together. We both majored in exercise physiology, so we had a lot of classes together. We were talking beforehand, and we're pretty sure we actually met in high school. So we go back quite a bit, But Drew is a certified and licensed prosthetist, and he's managing a practice for Kinney Orthopedics. He also hosts the Prosthetic Program podcast, which is a podcast about anything and everything prosthetics. And his passion is restoring independence and mobility to those who have experienced limb loss. And as a former strength coach, Drew loves working with amputees who are highly active and aspire to maximize their potential. But I just think Drew's work is extremely interesting, and I'm just excited to dive more into his story and then just into the amazing work that he's doing. So, Drew, thanks so much for coming on. It's great talking to you. I know it's been a while.
Yeah, it has. I'm definitely honored to have the opportunity to come on to your podcast and have a chat with you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to promote what you're doing. I think it's really great. And before we dive into the work that you're doing now, why don't you walk everybody listening kind of through your backstory, like where you're from, what really got you interested into the health and wellness field, and in your fitness journey as well, and just how all of that's kind of progressed to where you are right now.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. So I'm originally, from West Virginia, and that's where I kind of just grew up. And what we did growing up was play sports. Whether it was out in the yard playing football or basketball. Then you progress on to doing things in organized sports like high school, and ended up playing pretty much everything. Ran track, did football, basketball, cross country, tennis. And so I just kind of really developed this love of being physically active and always having something physical to manifest all my energy into. So then, but the thing is, genetically, or at least I'm going to blame genetics, I was not blessed enough to continue on into collegiate sports. So, I kind of turned all those energies into always going into the weight room, and put that into my academia when I kind of chose to do exercise physiology, because I had started out with biology, but ran into not loving writing lab reports. So definitely moved over to exercise phys, and then, wasn't really sure if I wanted to go to physical therapy school, wasn't sure if I wanted to go, dental school or medical school, what it was. So I took a year and got a master's of business administration. Ended up working as a GA at the West Virginia Student Rec Center, where I also kind of joined, I did join the powerlifting team there at the school, which is kind of where my love for lifting, developed even more. And then I decided to I did want to go ahead and try to follow that track of becoming a strength and conditioning coach. So I got involved with a couple of local high school teams, coached the football team and a basketball team for strength. Ended up going back to school again for my second master's in exercise and sports science at East Carolina University, and interned with the strength staff down there. Just kind of found that, the lifestyle was a little bit, I felt like I was going to burn out, and it just wasn't quite for me. And so I was, that was, if you ever get into that world, you kind of realize, man, they're going from like 4 a.m. till like 8 p.m. every day with, some breaks in between, but it can be pretty brutal. So I was doing research in the biomechanics lab for my master's degree when one of the doctoral students' her father came in, and he was a transtibial amputee. And we did, just kind of for fun, we did a 3D biomechanical gait analysis and just kind of got to talking to him about his prosthesis. And then it kind of just snowballed from there, where I got involved with a local clinic there in Greenville, North Carolina. And eventually, later that year, went back to school for what would be my third master's degree, this time in prosthetics and orthotics. So I probably have a record for master's degrees without, but. So
you are the master, basically.
Yeah. Master or jack of all trades or something like that.
What does the master's program look like for prosthetics? Like, how long of a program is that? Like, what does that program look like as a whole compared to the ones that you already had done?
So it's a little bit different. I was in the very, very first class that was required to be a master's degree in my field. There were some certificate programs and there were some master's programs. But the year I came into it, the credentialing bodies then required it to be a master's degree. The one that I did was through Northwestern University and was 6 months online training, 1 year on-site, hands-on practical training, and then 3 more months online, which is then followed by what you can do now is 2 different tracks of either doing an 18-month residency of both prosthetics and orthotics, or 1 year of prosthetics and 1 year of all orthotics. But some of the other schools, there's only 12 or 13 schools in the country that teach prosthetics and orthotics, and they're all a little bit different on their timelines and how they, some of them even work residencies into their programming.
That's cool. So would you say really that what drew you into it was just hearing that guy's story, or were you interested in did the mechanics aspect of it really bring you in? What did you really find about it that really drew you in and made you fall in love with it?
That's a really good question, and I wish I had a short answer, but really I don't, because it's really a combination of, you get to work hands-on and do something that really matters to a person's life. Because once and we'll just talk about legs for a second, if you lose a leg, how much independence do you lose at that moment when you have that amputation?
Yeah.
And so being able to provide that prosthesis, you're taking, and it's not something, building a prosthesis, there's your general basic guidelines to follow, but it's not simple either at the same time. So you're helping someone in a practical way that they can't help themselves. And you really get the opportunity to serve others, but you get to also work with your hands. You don't have to sit at a desk all day. And it's one of the few jobs that I was talking to a physical therapist one time about why she loved working with amputees. And it's one of the few jobs where somebody can, and this doesn't literally happen often, but theoretically somebody could roll in a wheelchair and then potentially walk out. So that's a huge change in somebody's mobility for that kind of potential.
Right. So, it has to be extremely rewarding because like you were talking about with the strength training aspects that you started out with, obviously that's fun, it's exciting, but like you were saying, the burnout, that's a real issue. It's kind of like, I've talked to a bunch of trainers that have worked with professional teams, and they say it starts out, you're basically doing everything. You're doing their laundry, you're there all hours of the night. It's not just train, that's it. It's everything, all of the dirty work. It's just a lot. And it's about putting other people's needs first. And this is too, but it's like you said, though, it's just extremely rewarding because somebody can wheel in, walk out, or just completely change their quality of life. And I'm sure you see this a lot too, Drew, but the effects that has on a person mentally. Because if they're coming in defeated with no hope, and they're able to find they can, if feel normal again, like, I mean, I just can't imagine what that must feel like.
Yeah, and we see that on a daily basis, and it's so easy to get caught up in the mechanical aspects of making sure your alignment is correct and the socket fits well and the foot is properly dorsiflexed or plantar flexed or whatever the mechanical aspects may be, because we're the only people who can work on that. So it's easy to forget about that mental aspect of, we need to make sure that the patient feels comfortable that, if they want a skin and cover on there, we need to put a skin and cover on there so that it looks more like a realistic limb. Or they want to be able to, I've even heard people argue that, maybe they don't need a symmetrical gait if it's more energy efficient, but maybe they want to, lose a little bit of that energy efficiency in order to put a pair of jeans on and not have anybody know that they have an artificial limb.
Right.
So there's, we can't forget to treat the mind as well as treating the body.
Yeah. And just remembering that they're a person, and it's not just, what angle is this, or what, just because you just mentioned that, like, how much is it like when you are looking at like the angles and stuff though, like how much is it on how you design it, or or is it like a lift in the shoe? Like, does all of that play a part, or is like the structure itself, is it pretty like good to go, and then like everything else is normal? Do you know what I mean?
I'm kind of following you, and I can say that it all matters. If you have a fixed ankle on a prosthesis, it's going to deflect and it's going to move with the properties of the carbon fiber or the fiberglass, whatever the foot's made out of.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were wearing a tennis shoe and it's aligned for a tennis shoe, and we have you walking perfect in a tennis shoe, and then all of a sudden you put on, a 2-inch heel, all of a sudden now your entire prosthesis is kicked forward.
Right. But the alterations can be made though for that person though, if they decide they want something else. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and sometimes it's tough, but it's also, we always have to remember and plan in mind and keep the long term in mind with the short term, because the human body is so dynamic, and that we're putting something that's, a socket is static, and there are ways to make it a little bit dynamic. But that, especially for somebody who's a new amputee, that residual limb, can fluctuate, not even during the day, but during an hour or two. So there's a whole, a lot that has to be considered for that.
Right. Because I mean, your body's trying to adapt to everything. So like are you working pretty closely then with like physical therapists and with like chiropractors? Like, is that something that you guys, are pretty closely partnered with?
Yeah. And, we always, even in school, and then especially after school, the whole teamwork approach to healthcare is essential, because, we see them and we get to know them get to know these people very well over the long term, because, if they have an amputation at, 65 or 75, they're still going to need adjustments and changes for the rest of their lives. But in the short term, somebody who's a physical therapist or a chiropractor or a physician is going to see them a lot more initially and have a lot more feedback on what's going on in their day-to-day life than we will, even though over the long term we may see them more. So that communication is huge.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because I'm just thinking like, it is changing the way your body is moving, and like you were saying, it's more static. So that's your body's going to be compensating to that. So that can throw off other things. And like, so just having that close relationship with other physicians has to be like so important. And, you were talking about, because you do enjoy like the lifting aspect of fitness for yourself. And like, I know you're pretty big into like CrossFit, those type of workouts, right?
I dabble. I won't say I'm good at them.
But like, so that's kind of influenced how, like, the kind of patients that you like to work with, because you were saying like you like to work with highly active amputees. So you kind of want to walk everybody through what it's like to work with an athlete that's, having to learn how to adapt and work out like this. And maybe like if they were an athlete before and then the accident happened, and now they have to relearn everything they just did. I can't imagine what that's like either. But do you kind of want to like just kind of describe to everybody what that's like, and then just your love for that.
Yeah. I mean, I will at least attempt to do so. Because, what I've found is in working with some of these people that, your principles don't change. You still have to make things specific to the person. You still have to, you still want the specific adaptations to the demands and you still have to modify, you still have to scale. But the big thing that changes the most is setting expectations. If you're super active before, you can be super active again in the future, but you have to manage that expectation that it's going to be a process and it's going to take time and it's going to be very frustrating. And there may be days where you want to throw your prosthesis or your orthosis out the window. And then a lot of it is, I've been working with people and I've really been trying to boil down some tips and tricks. But what I've found is everybody has, a different presentation, and you just have to modify kind of as they come. The one modification that works for one person may not next work for the next one. And that can even change, even if they have the same kind of prosthetic foot or the same kind of socket. You may have to do a slightly different modification. And I've kind of seen that, I was working with one guy and he couldn't get the squat. We were really trying to find a way to work his posterior chain. Squat just wasn't working with the alignment of his limb. And then tried to get the leg press just to get some kind of stimulus onto the lower body. Still couldn't get a good result. So the thing that ended up working best for him was kicking it over and doing a good morning style exercise to hit that posterior chain. Where another lady I worked with, there's no way that she was going to be able to get a good morning in, just due to the way that on her prosthetic side, her knee center was thrown off in relation to her contralateral side. So we just couldn't get a good morning. And there's, I'm saying good a lot of times there right in a row as a tongue twister.
Yeah. So just adapting to every buddy situation and that's interesting. And I'm sure as an athlete, I feel like as an athlete, you have to have that sharper mindset. But obviously when you have something so life-changing happen, obviously it's going to be hard physically to relearn how to do those things, but that's when that mental, just that strong mental, that mindset has to come back even stronger. Because you just have to, figure out, okay, this can be done. It's we were talking beforehand, I was listening to one of your podcasts with Logan Aldridge, and his story was crazy. And you go and look at his workouts, and he's killing it. He's killing it more than people who haven't had to deal with the type of situation that he's had. And I'm watching him do something these CrossFit lifts, and I'm like, geez, I can't even do that. You know what I mean? It's just, it's really cool to see how people can just figure out a way to get it done, really strengthen the body in an even way, because obviously you don't want to you have to have that strong base, that strong core, but it just really amazes me what the human body is really capable of doing.
Yeah, it's an incredibly, we underestimate it so much, in my opinion, on what it can do when you're right, when the mindset is correct. And I think Logan is a huge example of that. And if you listen to that podcast, or if you listen to anything that he's done or he talks about, or go to one of his seminars, it's clear that his mindset is what sets the foundation for what he can do physically.
Yeah. So for somebody in his case, he's doing some of those overhead squats, obviously with one arm, but you watch him do that, you wouldn't know it's one, if you were just looking at bottom half, you wouldn't know it's one arm. His core is so stable. Is that because of the increased core work, or is that more leg? What in his situation, what do you see more with just athletes adapting to that situation?
I think it's probably, that's hard to say.
Yeah.
Cause I'm trying to think about his situation. I'm trying to think of the things that he told me, cause I asked him some of those similar questions and I don't want to put words in his mouth. But I know for him that when a big thing for him was to quit ignoring his transhumeral side And he said that once he quit ignoring his transhumeral side and started using it to whatever extent he could, that his entire foundational body strength really skyrocketed, from the core to his legs, for everything.
That's cool. Yeah, that's just cool. Yeah, yeah. If you guys are listening, go check out his Instagram page. His name's Logan Aldridge. Big CrossFitter, and he'll blow your mind. And like, go check out his conversation with Drew on his podcast, because it's really cool to hear stories like that. And and Drew, we were talking before we started recording, and you were talking about just different things that you are working on now and like in the future. So you want to like just talk about different things that you're working on?
Yeah, I have several, I guess you could say, irons in the fire right now. Currently in the middle of a relocation so that I can become a practice manager for the company that I work for, providing prosthetics and orthotics. And then another thing I have going is the Prosthetic Paradigm, where it kind of got started because I'm a big listener to podcasts, because sometimes I just don't care to read, and I want to continue educating myself. Or you get in a car ride and, what's the perfect thing to do but to listen to a podcast and increase your knowledge so that you can provide better care for your patients. And so I have that going just to kind of, there's a lot of stuff that's in my field that's just not in a textbook, or it's not in information that's written down that you can seek out. So, why don't I kind of create an audio textbook essentially of either people's stories or people's techniques, or, like I did one on 3D printing for emerging technologies. So that's one thing I have going that has actually been going really well and I'm pretty happy with. And another is we are starting through Bluegrass Community Technical College here in Lexington, Kentucky. We're doing a first run program on making a prosthetic and orthotic technicians course.
That's cool.
So I'm a certified practitioner, prosthetist and orthotist. So I actually see the patient, do the clinical care, make the adjustments and such, and I can go make all the sockets and everything else or the AFOs or whatever. But typically what happens is I will put all my directions and instructions on a work order and then pass it off to one of our technicians who will actually do the fabrication of pulling the plastic, doing the lamination of the carbon socket or whatever else it may be. But those people are very skilled, but also very hard to find. So now I'm going to be kind of pioneering and creating a course here where we're teaching people to become those technicians and understand the material properties and be able to, pick out good plastics for whatever the patient's needs may be, or pick out, the correct layup of carbon. Because we always want to provide the highest amount of functionality while providing the least amount of device. So there's actually a lot of thought that goes into that. And I'm sure that I'm going to learn a ton in that as well. And then kind of one of the other irons that I have in the fire is I'm actually just joined the board of directors for the Kentucky Orthotic and Prosthetic Association. So, I got one more finger on my hand for one more job. So there's four.
That's awesome. No, I love that. And you should, as much as possible, like document that whole process of making the tech program, because where that's a new thing, like you're going to want to be able to share all of those details. And like, make sure you document that as much as possible, like, video form and audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And hey, just like a side tangent off like what you were just saying a second ago, I didn't get to listen to the episode yet, and I want to. But you were talking about like the 3D printing aspect of it. How big of a role like is that playing right now? And like, because in theory it sounds really good. I don't really know how 3D printing works. So if you just kind of want to just give a quick description and how it's being utilized right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So 3D printing is, it's big in some other industries right now. Right now for prosthetics, some people are using it. It's kind of working its way into the field. I think it is a big part of the future. I think it's got a little bit of a way to go still yet before it's really proliferates itself into the industry. But essentially, we always took plaster casts. Now we kind of take fiberglass casts of the person's residual limb. And now even we use white light or laser scanners to create a 3D image, and we can modify that on the computer instead of doing it in plaster. Even though sometimes we still do, but then we can send it through software to where it's actually just printed, and plastic is kind of melted and then layered on top of each other, and you can choose thicknesses, different plastics, stuff like that to kind of get what you want. But the goal is to kind of cut down on time that it takes to get that socket made so that you can have a quicker fitting, use less materials, be less wasteful, and kind of cut costs in a lot of ways, but also provide more quicker, efficient care.
No, that's cool. I think it's super interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, I would think that would have to be the way of the future, right? Just as more, it sounds like just super precise. Like, is it more precise than going the traditional route?
I think that people say it is, the people who are trying to push the 3D printing and sell the 3D printers. Right. I know I have not done any 3D printing myself, but I think that scanning can be a huge tool. I've scanned and done many sockets that came from the computer software, and they fit very well. It creates a whole dynamic. You go from using hand skills and modifying plaster, getting dirty, to now creating computer skills. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic. But I think that you could use both of them effectively. It's just kind of what works best for that person.
Right. No, I think that's super interesting. And I am excited to go back and listen to that podcast episode where you guys dive into that, because I just think it's really cool. But no, I love that. But yeah, so, Drew, like, what is the best way for people to follow you on social media? That way they can keep up with the latest podcasts that come out or anything that you're working on?
Yeah, I think the best way is going to be to look at my Instagram. I try to keep it pretty up to date. The podcasts are coming out, kind of try to keep them coming at a steady rate, at a few weeks in between episodes. I think it's just my name, Drew Nutter, and that's kind of where you can find it. And that's the best way to kind of follow me and what's going on with that.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. And then Drew, just a closing question that I ask every guest. But if you just had one piece of advice for the audience, maybe it's been something that been your biggest takeaway through your own wellness fitness journey, or your own takeaway through everything you've learned so far from just working with these amazing patients. But if you just had one piece of advice to give, what would it be?
I think that piece of advice is something that I've gained from all those experiences, and that's just whoever you're working for, not meaning the company you're working for, but whoever that patient is or that client is, always keep them at the forefront and always keep them as the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing, so that you always make sure that you maintain a high quality of care, and that person knows that they can trust you and they can count on you, because whether insurance says we're going to do this or we're not going to do this, or whether, the gym you're training somebody at says you can't do this, you have to do this, they know that you're going to go to bat for them, you're going to fight for them, and that you're going to provide them with what they actually need and what they actually need to succeed, and you're going to give them the tools that they need. So I think that's my piece of advice, is always to just make sure that you remember the reason, and that reason is the person that you're serving.
Awesome. No, that's perfect, Drew. And just thank you so much for taking time to come on. I really loved having you. And you guys that are listening, please go give him a follow, give his podcast a follow, because it's really great and you're going to learn so much. So just, Drew, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. I enjoyed it.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you loved my conversation with Drew. I love the work he's doing, so be sure to give him a follow on social media to keep up with everything that he's been working on. You can find his social media links, podcast link, everything that we talked about in the episode in the show notes, but you can also find them on my website as well at drcaseyjohnson.com. That's drkaseyjohnson.com. Click on the Listen tab. Then from there, you'll be able to see all of the past guests that have come on the Unlock Wellness podcast, read a little bit about each guest, and be able to click on their social media links, websites, all of that. So all of Drew's information can be found on my site as well. If you guys loved today's episode with Drew, be sure to jump onto iTunes, subscribe, and write a review. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate all of the feedback and support. Thank you guys so much again for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you loved it. I hope it inspires you. And most importantly, I hope you take action.